Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, in today's episode, we're going to get into mock-up number 2 for the station, and the key focus of this mock-up is to venture into the extended canopy that used to be on the station before at some point it was all taken down. So the musical montage at the beginning of this video, that was a very sped up footage just showing the recreation for this second mock-up. So using the original plans which we now have, it was a case of redoing the, well, digital plans I should say, for this model. So that was a very sped up approach to looking at how that was all sort of put together. So unfortunately, when I was recording for this episode, I thought I'd try my camera on a different setting, which was one of the scene settings on the camera, and I had no idea it was actually going to affect my audio as well. So the majority of this video I've had to do a bit of repair work on the audio, but nonetheless it sounds like I'm speaking through a bottle full of water. It sounds a bit weird. I tried to fix it as best I can. It's not horrendous, but it's not as good as what I'd like. And then of course right at the end of this video it dawned on me what was happening, and of course sorted out the audio at the end. So I think without further ado, let's just jump into what I got up to with this mock-up number 2. So what I'm doing at the moment is just cutting out the columns for this canopy, and these aren't how the final design will be. This is purely more of a mock-up approach to the canopy and how it will be supported. So the card that I'm using for this is 1.4mm case board, so it's a little bit heavier, and I've also actually included the pitch as well in the whole unit, so I can attach our canopy and fold it to the correct angle. So this is the canopy section here as well, and it'll be folded along those two edges and then joined up here, so you can see there's a bit of a gap here, and I'll cut that out first. So we're just sort of carefully cutting this out, and it's not to scale really. These columns will probably be a bit thinner than this. I've just done a 2mm width, just mainly for a bit of durability, so that the card doesn't curl up too much. So it's a little bit tricky cutting this card because it is quite heavy or dense card, even though it's only 1.4mm thick. So it's just a case of trimming these bits out. These are obviously going to take the longest to sort of sort out in terms of cutting, but what we're going to do is we're just going to cut one of these out, and of course I'll just get on with the rest of them off camera. It's just a case of going through this with quite a heavy knife to cut through this, and being quite small they of course slide about on the cutting mat, which doesn't help. So we're just got to cut. I'm just going to cut this curve out very crudely. Doesn't need to be perfect or anything like this. This is sort of roughly what I have worked out or anticipated the height of these top sections will be in terms of this ornate, I would say, wrought iron or cast iron supports at the top of the column. So I haven't got the notch in here. You know, there's two parts to this top column, and there is the possibility, as I mentioned in a previous video, that this will be 3D printed, although it is actually quite small, so I'm not quite sure how well 3D printing might work, but it's worth a go. Now, I don't have a 3D printer, but I do have some friends who have a 3D printer and are reasonably adept at producing 3D components, so that part of the process I am going to subcontract out to somebody to produce the 3D printed columns and wrought iron supports. Right, so very crudely cut out, but that's essentially a rough representation of a column. And of course what I've got here is just some indications. Would not be part of the canopy, these wee sort of rectangles or notches here. This just shows me where these supports actually are positioned on the canopy once I fold this into place. So you'll notice that there's two different variations of this canopy here. We've got a short one, and then there's one that extends out. Now these two are the ones that are actually going to sit within the alcove area. So yeah, there's a bit of cutting involved in this, so I'll definitely do the rest of that off camera, and we'll just take a look at this canopy, because what I want to do is just test this. So the first thing we need to do is just do the splits in here, and I worked this all out on the computer, the pitch and angle of the roof, and of course it's all based on guesswork, because of course we don't have original drawings of the canopy, so, and we have some very poor photos showing the canopy, but there is one photo that is not too bad. It's good enough for me to sort of work it all out. And for example, the number of glass panes in here, so there's actually 8 across the end, I think that's right, 1 2 3 4 per side, and then based on that worked out, because I would assume that the panes of glass would be the same width apart, otherwise you wouldn't get them meeting up correctly on the corner apex. So based on that, working out the length of the canopy, and then of course one of the things, how did I work out the width of this canopy, and that was a little bit more tricky, and sort of having to kind of do a little bit of guesswork in terms of that width with that concrete base that is in front of the station on the platform side, because the canopy posts seem to come down exactly where the edge of that concrete base is. And what I actually did is marked out where the corner in the internal corner of the recess on the platform side, worked out some angles, and basically came to the conclusion that the width of that concrete base is roughly twice the width of the alcove area. So give or take a bit of perspective that's involved there, which is kind of tricky to kind of work out, but that's what I sort of came to, or that's the conclusion that I came to in terms of the width of that concrete base. And from that concrete base I could then sort of work out, right, well that's where the posts come up at the edge of that concrete pad, and that sort of gave me a rough idea of the width of the canopy. Now, not forgetting that obviously these posts are actually recessed in from the edge of the canopy, so as you can see here, these columns and their intricate supports at the top are perpendicular to the railway station or to the canopy, so they're actually sit inwards. So the canopy actually extends out a little bit, I would say, from beyond the edge of the concrete pad. So it's quite sort of tricky trying to work it all out, but I think I may have sort of got reasonably close in terms of representation. And of course the whole reason really behind doing this canopy is I've got to work out, well, A, is there room for this canopy on my platform, and also what are the clearances like for passenger coaches at the edge of the platform, because as you know, I don't have the same vast width of station platform as the real station does. So this canopy is actually going to be right at the edge of the platform, which is not unlike a lot of railway stations in the UK anyway. They do actually run the edge of the canopy right to the edge of the platform, or as close as it possibly can be in terms of clearances for passenger trains. So I'm just lightly scoring these lines without going all the way through, so that we can get our fold. So that's our fold there, our fold for there, and then it's just a case of folding all the way down the ridge. Now the theory is that when it's folded, we now have that butting up with there, so we've got that profile at the end of the canopy, and based on my calculations, this should fold up to that sort of profile, and then this should anchor in there, and that should be hopefully the correct angle for these supports here. So, but as I mentioned, the real model, the finished model won't look like this at all. This will be a girder running through here. There'll be a bit of a framework for the canopy. It won't be a solid block like this, and these supports, the columns, will be a separate component. So as you can see, it is really very intricate, so this is going to be interesting, albeit of course when it comes to the finished model or the final model, all this kind of stuff's going to be laser cut, so I won't need to be worrying about trying to hand cut any of this stuff. So I think that seems to be okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on trimming out the rest of these, and then of course there's also our building components as well. So this is our central section, so very much like the previous mock-up. The only difference is I've added a little bit of detail in this time around, so we've got an indication of the stonework. It doesn't include the brickwork, it's just the main stonework, which is at the corners of the building and around the windows. So I've got to score these lines, we'll score all this stuff, we'll fold all this and we'll make it all up. But since you saw that in the previous mock-up video, I'm not going to worry about videoing it for this one. I'll just get on and do it and come back when I've got these components all together and see how it looks. Right, so I've now finished cutting out these columns and the canopy apex profile, plus a little bit of what would be the girders that come out of the building as well, so they're all done. So I've sandwiched two of these together because essentially we've got two different lengths. So what we've actually got here, and you have to mind these giant clamps in the way, is we've got a canopy support that's going to come out about here on this one, so that's for that wall, and then these longer ones are the ones that stretch back into this alcove, and they're sort of in here, but the idea is that they come out to the same alignment from the edge of the railway station building. So what I've done is I've just clamped two of these together in order to work out the distance from the short one to the long one, and that's what these bits of grey card are in here at the moment. So I've just clamped them temporarily onto here. This is where the edge of this building, the central section, needs to butt up to in order for the alignment of the canopy to be exactly where it should be. So rather than using staples this time, as I did in the previous mock-up where I just simply stapled these buildings together, I will actually glue these together and clamp them, and in that case I can sort of move this around and slide it into place before the glue sets, and it'll just mean that that's more accurate. So we'll just quickly do that now, and I think I will use some PVA glue for this, and it looks like I'm going to go and have to find it. So I've now clamped this into place, and as you can see we've got this wall butting up to the spacer card here just to make sure it aligns when it comes to putting this canopy on. So we can probably take these spacer cards out, or at least that one out, and this should theoretically be where the canopy, and we can just sort of work it out that the canopy will slot in here. Right, so I've now assembled the bulk of the station, and of course, as pretty much as the first mock-up I did, there is essentially 3 components, the 2 end sections and then the middle sections, and just a little bit of corner bracing to firm it up a little bit. It's still quite thin and flimsy, but that's okay. And then we've got our canopy now set up, and as you can see, these are the basic struts and so forth underneath and where the columns are, and this is pretty close in terms of the position of the columns and possibly also the pitch of the roof. This will be sort of interesting to see whether I've got that correct, and to me it looks reasonably okay in terms of that. So the idea is that is going to slot in here, and I'll glue this component in, and as I did with the first mock-up, I'm going to measure out and create the roofs, not on the computer, but just to work it out actually on the structure as we've got it now. So we've also got the glass canopy that's in this area here, which did remain after this canopy was taken away, and we have really no sort of indication at what point this external canopy was dismantled, but in here the glass canopy remained, and for quite some time, possibly up until the sort of early 80s, when it was eventually removed and a new type of canopy came out, which ran along the same roof line as this angle here. So I'm going to map out roughly where that canopy is going to go and also position that in there. So first of all, I'm just actually going to glue this in, and this might be a bit tricky, but essentially why I'm gluing this in now is it's going to square this building up a bit better. So as you can see, I've got the correct distance for these girders that went into this wall in here. So, and the remains of those girders still exist, and then we also had the girders here, and you can see on the current walls where they used to protrude out and were obviously cut off. So we're just going to carefully try and glue this on, which could be a bit tricky, and I'm using rocket card glue for this. So I essentially use pretty much rocket card glue for this entire canopy structure, and anchor this into place. So these canopy supports or girders, they were central in between the windows. Right, so I've now got the canopy anchored to the front of the station, and as you can see, that's basically how it's been attached, and this is really, I think, how this canopy works. So these are these girders. Admittedly, I've just got solid chunks of cardboard, but these would be single girders, then would be an apex structure of sorts underneath, and then it's anchored into the walls along here. So that's really how I suspect this was actually constructed in its original form. So we're just going to attach some roof sections now. So as I mentioned, I've actually sort of worked these out after I'd assembled all of this, because there's quite a bit of intricate detail going on in here, and of course also with the cross ridge in between these two ridges as well. So as you can see, there's some unusual cuts or shapes in here, and that actually is to cater for the glass canopy section that's in here. So I haven't drawn lines on this, so these lines represent glass, but this would also have some lines in it as well, and that just slots in there. So this is also cut into various sort of notches for it to fit in, so that will place in there. So what I'll do is I'll just start gluing all this into place, and you'll see it take its form or shape. Right, so that's the roof sections attached and fixed into place, and you can really start to see how the roofline and profile works on this station. So the small bit of canopy that remained is this section here, and I think for some time it remained as glass, but I think eventually it then became slate tiles of some sort, and of course then later on it was just removed altogether. And then this roof actually carries on down in the current rendition of the station, but this is now what the external canopy may have actually looked like. So we'll head over to the layout. I'm going to place it on our temporary platform, and let's just see how this looks, and of course critically how the canopy is going to work in relation to passing trains. Right, so I've now got the station building down on the temporary platform, and I must admit, with the canopy now in place, it's certainly looking the part, and it's also slightly different in proportions to the first mock-up. So with those original plans that we managed to get hold of, it's made a huge difference. And of course also just adding a little bit of the stonework detail as well also gives a better idea of how the station is going to look. So starting from the street side, and one of the interesting things I noted is the canopy that runs down, or the lean-to that runs down over the main entrance into the station. I thought, gosh, that looks really long. It looks like it's protruding out quite a bit. But the interesting thing is, in the real building, it does. It's really quite an overhang for that section of roof. So that was actually worked out from the plan. So I just sort of managed to work out how far that protrudes out. Of course, at the moment I don't actually have the supports in there, like I wasn't worried about adding those at this point. But looking at the canopy itself, I certainly think the proportions are actually quite good. I think they're quite close. I mean, it's going to be hard to actually get the exact proportions because of, unfortunately, as I mentioned, we don't have any plans for the actual canopy section, but with a little bit of research and investigation, as I did in the previous video, I think I was pretty much able to work out where the girder structures were that were mounted into the wall, and I think a reasonably close approximation as to the depth of the canopy, so how far it extends out beyond the edge of the station. So I've placed it where it actually works in very well with some passenger stock. So we've got some Mark 1 coaches lined up in front of the canopy, and of course there's really good clearances, and there are situations, well, there's plenty of stations out there in the UK where the canopy does actually line up, or is very close to the edge of the platform. Now the interesting thing is, of course, with the real station, the station is actually set back quite a way from the edge of the platform, and of course so is the canopy. So it's interesting, it's quite an unusual layout or design actually for a station. It's not often that I've seen or researched stations in the UK where the station is actually quite a way back from the edge of the platform, and the canopy doesn't go right up to the edge of the platform. So regardless of passengers sitting under the canopy when it's pouring down with rain, they're still going to get wet before they board the coach. So looking from the underside of the canopy and sort of working out the structure and so forth, that will be something that is obviously going to come at a later stage, and there's also going to be a bit of guesswork in that as well, because we don't really have any decent photography of the underside of the canopy as such. But you can certainly see how the platform side of the building actually looks, although you've got to consider that in this mock-up, of course, we've got a solid cardboard canopy roof. This, of course, will be a glass roof, or in the situation for the real live model that I'm building, that will be some form of clear plastic or acetate of some sort. So the light's actually going to shine through there, so it's not going to look as dingy and dark as this current mock-up looks at the moment. But I think in terms of the proportions, the alignment of the canopy girders, they line up with the stone course, the upper stone course on the walls. And then the actual canopy support brackets, these sort of ornate cast iron brackets, I believe that they actually line up with the second course of stonework, which runs through the upper part of the windows around the entire station. So I'm really happy with this mock-up, and I believe now I don't need to do another mock-up. I may be doing another mock-up of the canopy, and there'll be sort of testing of tolerances with materials, because some of this detail in here is going to be excessively intricate, and although this will be laser cut components and so forth in here, it's still going to be insanely difficult to model it. So it's going to be a challenge actually, this station, but I love a challenge and I'm very much looking forward to it. So there we have it, mock-up number 2, and as I mentioned, I'm pretty happy with it. So I think from this point now we can actually really start to delve into the nitty-gritty detail within the actual construction of the station. So I may just focus on small components at first. So for example, window frames, the canopy supports and wrought iron features, things like that I need to iron out at the early stages, just to work out, as I mentioned, the tolerances that I can actually work to with a laser cutter and certain given materials, and just see how fine I can actually produce certain elements. So rather than let this video go on any longer, I thought I'd just like to say a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everyone, and also to those who've recently joined the channel. Welcome, of course, to the channel, and I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and ideas for your own layouts. So do take care, everyone. Look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.